Hey everybody, what is going on? Hexlex here. I got another Master Duel video for you. So it is the top of the season. I figured we'd go ahead and do our tier list for the beginning of season 40. I think we're actually on number 40 now. I have been thinking about this, and I think I do want to continue to do the mid-season tier list as well. If we get another selection pack this month, which I actually think could be a possibility, it happened last year around this time, then I think I'll go ahead and definitely move forward with that. But even if the meta significantly shifts, I could see it as well. So with this tier list, it's going to be a little like... Usually when I do tier lists, I don't know how else to say it, but I kind of just tend to put things where I would expect them to be on a tier list, and I think that's true of a lot of Yu-Gi-Oh! Tier lists. So for this one, I want to make a little bit more of an effort to actually be like, okay, this is how strong I personally think this deck is. Might end up looking like, you know, samey to a lot of tier lists anyway, might not. We'll see as we plow through it. I'm going to start with Kash Tira. Kash Tira has seen a slight significant consistency boost in the form of 7th Tachyon, but I don't think having 4 Rotas to search for exactly Rise Heart is like, excuse me, good enough to bring this out of Rogue category for me. I understand that when Kash Tira does get going, as in a Rise Heart plus Era plus Fenrir plus Unicorn, excuse me, that is, you know, it can be a bit of a daunting board, but honestly, that board is, like, one, not very often achieved, even by a dedicated Kash Tira deck because of how much it's lacking consistency. 2, it's really not even that big of a deal to break, honestly, because it has no inherent negates, meaning that you could just start firing off like imperms or other board breaker cards, and the deck really has no inherent out to that. And most of all, I really don't think it's like super duper strong. I mean, if they have the Arise Heart in your deck, you know, is hurt by the banishing, that is what it is. But when it comes to stuff like Fenrir and Unicorn, I just don't think they're like particularly threatening as inboard pieces personally. Blue Eyes, I think, is a pretty solid tier 3 deck. I think it's kind of the definition of a tier 3 deck. It can do a lot of powerful things off of a fairly simple end board, but I think that simplicity in the end board is a little bit of an issue with the Blue Eyes deck. Not to mention its susceptibility to hand traps, particularly like Droll and Nibiru, which are both fairly popular right now. Saw a lot of play in the top Duelist Cup decks. I think a lot of that is what's holding back Blue Eyes. Obviously, once Primate comes out, it has a lot more options for plays that it can make and will go up in power as such. Mikanko, I'm going to put it towards the top of Rogue. I think Mikanko and its variants are still solid, even though they're not seeing a lot of representation. That's something we'll talk about with a couple of other decks on this tier list as well, but there's often... It's really easy to make the correlation in your head. Oh, if a deck is not seeing a lot of play, then that means it's not particularly powerful. And I think Mikanko still has a lot of legs. The thing that I think is an issue with Mikanko is that its 2 variants are either a going second OTK style deck or a long form combo deck with like the Infernobles, right? And the problem is that when it comes to being a going second OTK deck, there's Tenpai, which just does that better. When it comes to being long-form combo decks, there's like any number of Fiendsmith decks in this meta, which just kind of do that better. Better as in they can play through more hand traps and have better end boards, so on and so forth. Maybe not necessarily better end boards if the Mikanko Infernoble deck goes all the way through. That end board is pretty disgusting, but it's really susceptible to hand traps and doesn't have as a lot of doesn't have nearly as much bounce back or recovery as a lot of other long-form combo decks in this meta. Okay, this one might be controversial to some people. Yubel, I'm putting it in tier 3. Like, I was thinking about this for quite a bit. This is one of the main decks that made me kind of decide, like, okay, this is going to be more of what I think as opposed to what I think, where, you know, where I think things, quote-unquote, should be, whatever that even means, right? Yubel's a deck that I want to put in tier 2, but the more I think about it, I really don't know if I can put it higher than tier 3. And that might sound surprising, considering that Yubel hasn't had any, you know, major ban list hits recently, and also the fact that it is helped by Fiendsmith. The problem with Yubel is that it's kind of what I was just describing with Mikanko, right? Although it's more directly correlated with something like Snake Eye or other, you know, high meta decks that are playing the Fiendsmith engine. Like, yes, the Fiendsmith engine helped Yubel, but the way that it accelerated decks like Snake Eye, again, it's a lot to do with what the deck can push through in terms of hand traps and having follow-up plays. Like, you think about Millennium, Fiendsmith, and Snake Eye. These are all engines within that deck that work both independently and also can lead into each other. Fiendsmith stuff and Yubel can only really be woven into the combo line unless you open with Engraver, and then you can go Fiendsmith into the Yubel line, but that's just it. You're only doing ever one sort of concentrated combo line, whereas Millennium, Fiendsmith, Snake Eye, all that stuff can start in any direction and, you know, pick up with almost any given extender. Yubel has a lot more difficult of a time doing that. I will say the end board is also just not that appealing, honestly. It's very difficult to actually end on Veradros. You typically have to have like a 2-card combo hand to be able to put an Omni Negate actually on your end board. And even without an Omni Negate, right, the end board of, like, you know, Appaloosa, the Unchained Soul, Link 2, and you know, like a Phantom is not terribly difficult to push through. Appaloosa, especially if you're a deck like Yubel, which is relying a lot more on that as an inboard piece than something like Snake Eye, especially in a meta where Kash Unicorn is everywhere, it's so easy to go like, you know, all right, special Unicorn, battle over the Appo, and then, you know, cool, I can combo now. Now, granted, if you have like Nightmare Plane plus Phantom, it's not just as simple as slapping down the Unicorn, but it's really not that complicated to bait the Phantom effect, you know, and then be able to push through the rest of the end board very easily. So that's why some of the reasons why I'm putting Yubel in tier 3 might look a little weird, but I think that is accurate. Sprite, I'm going to put towards the bottom of tier 3, because while I do love this deck, I will also acknowledge that it is not necessarily the most powerful. It's kind of like Yubel in terms of, like, yeah, you play Fiendsmith with Sprite, and that really helps you do Sprite stuff, but at the end of the day, Sprite stuff is very, like, limited in what it can do as opposed to, again, something like Millennium, Fiendsmith, Snake Eye, or, like, upper power level decks. So I think tier 3 is a good spot. For Runick and its variants, I mean, I guess I'm mostly thinking of Runick Stun, but I also have Stun listed as its own thing over here, so I don't know. Runick, I gotta put even lower than Cashier. I guess I could talk just about how I feel about Runick's power level as an engine. One Fountain is brutal. This is something that I've said for quite a long time, and I think it's been true for quite a long time. I think it's been true even before SP came out, but at the very least, you have to acknowledge that once SP Little Knight came out and banishing the one of Fountain became super easy to do, that this engine, this archetype's power level dropped hard. I think we're long overdue for a second Fountain. I'll always throw in the caveat that Tip should probably go to 1 if Fountain's going to come back to 2, but I think that would be a more than fair trade. As the engine currently stands, again, it doesn't even always see play in Stun. That's still very 50-50. You know, stuff like Runick Bestial has lost a lot of steam in the wake of, like, Fiendsmith Bestial. I don't know. Not looking good. Not looking good for the Runick deck. Sky Striker. I think Sky Striker, I want to put it around the same place as Cashiera, but I think it almost has the opposite problem that Cashiera does. Cashiera can put out a very powerful end board. It just can't ever really do it consistently at all. Sky Striker is very consistent at what it does. It's just not particularly powerful. Of course, Sky Striker has seen a lot of success in combination with Tenpai, but I do consider that to be more of a Tenpai deck utilizing Sky Striker cards to help it as opposed to a dedicated Sky Striker deck, which is a little bit more of what I'm talking about here. Of course, Sky Striker did get some recent support in the OCG that I think very much helps the power level issue, but it's going to be quite some time before we see that in MD, so I gotta keep it down in Rogue for now. Tearlaments, I'm definitely willing to put in tier 2. Actually, if I'm thinking about this from a post-banlist perspective, do I think Tearlaments is still tier 2? I actually think it is. I think it's still a little bit better than Yubel, mostly because I think that, again, this format, this meta in particular, really values being able to diversify and branch out your plays in rough spots. I think Tearlaments is a little bit better at that than Yubel. Like, I'm gonna put Tearlaments, I think, at the bottom of tier 2 and Yubel at the top of tier 3. So the difference between them is not great, but I think it is still significant enough. Now, the Beatrice ban, I think, does hurt Tearlaments quite a bit more than a lot of other Fiendsmith-based decks, because the Beatrice was the major appeal of Fiendsmith in Tearlament. You know, with something like Snake Eye, you can still justify playing the Fiendsmith stuff just to get bodies on board. But Tearlament doesn't necessarily want just any old bodies on board. It is a little bit specific in what it wants to do. And without Beatrice, I don't know how well Fiendsmith fits into that. I can very easily see Tearlament slipping down to tier 3. For the time being, I'm going to hedge and put them at the bottom of tier 2. Speaking of tier 2, I gotta put Ritual Beast. You know what? I almost want to put Ritual Beast in tier 1 just in terms of how powerful I think it is in the right hands. Now, this is, I think, one of the other big decks that sort of... Because if you're trying to make a tier list based on representation, which I guess really is more of what I was talking about earlier in terms of what you would quote-unquote expect to see on a tier list, right? If a tier list is more representing, or more, you know, presenting representation rates than actual, like, power levels, then, yeah, you know, Ritual Beast would be probably in tier 2 or maybe even tier 3. But, again, in terms of the power level in the right hands, I do think Ritual Beast is a tier 1 deck. And we saw evidence of this in the Duel Cup, as we often have since Ritual Beast has been released. One of the biggest, like, case points, if you have, you know, somebody you know is trying to pull the whole, like, Yu-Gi-Oh! Is not skill-based, you just blah, 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 decks play themselves thing, just point to Ritual Beast, hand them a Ritual Beast deck and say, okay, win with this, I dare you. Because, yeah, it's not something that just anybody can do. Definitely not me, even, for sure. I have this deck, I just haven't played it just because I'm so intimidated by it, but anyway. Oh, Centurion. I love Centurion. I think this deck is really cool, but until it gets its follow-up support, I really don't think I could put it higher than tier 3. Centurion and Blue Eyes, funnily enough, now that the Magistus Chorozo is out, is like a thing, and it's very solid. I think we covered it even in a recent viewer special. We did, actually. I know we did. But... again, without the follow-up support, which I really do think will elevate Centurion and what it's capable of in terms of its plays, I can't put it higher than where Blue Eyes and Yubel are at, right? I gotta put it in tier 3. Voiceless, I'm gonna put it in tier 2. I'll put it a little bit above Tearlament, because Voiceless is a deck that, much like Tearlament, you know, the Beatrice ban means that you're not really going to see Fiendsmith in it moving forward, because I think the only appeal of Fiendsmith and Voiceless was to be able to go into Beatrice, bin the Diviner, go into Sprite Elf, and then bring the Diviner back, and then use that to get your play started. That said, Voiceless is still a very solid deck that is actually decently compatible with future archetypes that have yet to come out. But yeah, we'll just have to see how it is moving forward. It's a lot like Ritual Beast, where like nobody really plays this deck, but that doesn't mean it's not a tier 2 deck. Speaking of decks that are really solid, it's just that nobody plays. I think Rescue Ace is a pretty firmly tier 3 deck among the power level of stuff like Centurion and Blue Eyes. But Rescue Ace is just a deck that nobody wants to play. It's like I was saying earlier in the video. It's really easy to make that correlation in your head of like, okay, if nobody's playing this deck, then it must not be good, right? But I think I've even heard about Rescue Ace winning very, very recent community tournaments. The problem, right, is that people either want to play the best and or most exciting deck in the room. And a deck like Voiceless Voice or a deck like Rescue Ace, these decks are neither, right? They are neither the best deck nor the most exciting deck in the room. You know, as cool as I think Rescue Ace is in terms of what the effects do and aesthetically, I will say that, like, yeah, it doesn't take very long for me personally of Turbulence Set 4 to get really old really fast. Does that mean it's bad? No. Certainly, again, not the best deck in the room, but far from the worst. And I would expect if you're taking a deck like Voiceless Voice or Rescue Ace to a community tournament, that if you're piloting it well enough, you should be able to top, if not win. And if you're taking it to rank ladder and you're piloting well enough, which is not even the same skill required to pilot something like Ritual Beast, then yeah, you should pretty easily be able to hit Master, even Master 1 going into rating duels. But how many people want to do that is the question, I think, when it comes again to decks like Voiceless and Rescue Ace. Not bad. That's why I'm putting them where they are in terms of sheer power level. But in terms of popularity, these decks are both, like, you know, way lower down on the list here. Drytron, I'm gonna put the... I'll put down here at Rogue. I mean, yeah, well, even below this other stuff. Like, Drytron's just one of those decks where, like, when it pops off, like other long-form combo decks, but unlike other long-form combo decks in this meta, it can actually just get stopped by one hand trap a lot more easily than a lot of other decks. So Tenpai, with Sangen Sangen Kaiman going to 1, was it 2, is taking another limit. But I think that Tenpai is still going to be like a very, very solid deck in the meta. I'm going to put it in tier 2 moving forward, even keeping that limit in mind. Because, like, yeah, of course that is going to reduce the consistency of Tenpai. But 1, I don't think it's going to be by enough for it to make a huge difference. And 2, even if it does, you look at, like, builds that did well in the Duels Cup and just do well in general in tournaments and ranked ladder, and it's still pretty 50-50 whether or not you actually play Gold Sark and Blaster. Like, there's still a lot of decks that see a lot of success that weren't playing those cards for additional search power. So if the argument for Tenpai being lower on the tier list is that, oh, it should be there because it's getting reduced consistency by Sangen Kaiman going to 1, I would argue that it could easily make up for that across the board by en masse playing the Gold Sark and Blaster. Now, obviously, those are very different functions within the deck in terms of being a starter, an extender, or when you can use them. But, long story short, I think Tenpai is going to remain a very solid tier 2 deck. Stun is stun is stun is stun is stun. What is there to say about it? You know, if you go first, great. If you go second, honestly, even if you go first, a lot of the time there's a lot of ways for meta decks to push through your floodgates, which I kind of want to make a video about that. I want to make a video showing me going second against stun and winning against a lot of different meta decks, but I either need to find somebody with a stun deck that I can enter a duel room with, or just save up a bunch of different games against stun over the course of like a whole season. Either way, it's an endeavor that I still need to figure out how I want to approach. But yeah, I think that stun games are winnable far, 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 far more often than some people might think they are. But regardless, I don't think stun is a particularly good deck. It's not horrible. None of these decks on this tier list are, but also... the nice thing about putting stun on a tier list is that nobody gets mad when it's at the bottom of the tier list. If any other deck is at the bottom of the tier list, there's going to be a comment of like, that deck's not the worst, but when it's stun, everyone's fine with that. So yeah, I'm going to leave it there. Exodia, this deck has been seeing a lot less play, I've noticed, as time has gone on. I think it's been a rogue deck, honestly, this whole time. It's kind of a variant of stun. I guess it does play certain floodgates, but it's obviously enough of its own thing, I think, to be here. Now, this is the Millennium/Unstoppable Exodia deck as a whole. When it comes to Millennium as an engine, that's going to be in Tier 1 status. But again, these are more about like decks celebrating the actual engines themselves. Mathmech. Ooh, where do I want to put Mathmech? I can't really put it any higher than something like Centurion or Blue Eyes. Yeah, I'm going to put it down here. I think, you know, again, this is one of those decks that I really, really like, but if I'm being totally honest with myself in terms of its power level, I do think it's probably just upper tier 3. Circular, I don't know. I guess there is an argument, maybe once Malice comes out, that it might need to go to 1, but I think for the time being, it's perfectly fine at 3. Snake Eye, do I even gotta, like, of course, I'm gonna put it at the top of tier 1. The Beatrice ban does not change this whatsoever. In fact, Snake Eye is the deck least affected by the Beatrice ban. So what do I think needs to happen to Snake Eye? You know, I did say OSS ban in one of my recent Snake Eye videos, but I will admit that part of that was just me kind of like trying to take the heat off myself at the beginning of the video. That was my I love Snake Eye video. And I think there was a part of me deep down that was like, okay, if I don't say that OSS ban is a viable hit at the start, I'm actually going to get like just crucified in the comments. But I don't know. I actually think that might be a little bit harsh the more I think about it. I've seen people say Oak ban. That's like the most confusing one to me. That does like nothing to the Snake Eye engine. I think Flamberge ban would also be harsh. I think you would also still see Snake Eye as an engine occasionally, even without Flamberge. Really, I think at the end of the day, it probably comes down to the Diabellstar limit. And I think that would probably just be enough. Maybe Bonfire Limit as well. That would reduce the consistency enough in combination with the Beatrice ban and also Fiendsmith hits like Engraver to 1. I think that Diabell and Engraver to 1 would be huge blows to the deck. And if... what was the other one I just said? The other possible limit. I just said it. I literally just said it. Now I can't even... remember. Shoot. Wow. That's bad. That's bad if my memory is that bad. But yeah, I think Diabell and Engraver to 1 would be sufficient hits, which I think is what the OCG did as well. But yeah, obviously Beatrice ban, not enough in of itself to keep Snake Eye from being the best deck. And as much as I love playing this deck, I think it is a little bit powerful in this meta. So Labyrinth. Labyrinth is a deck that did exceedingly well in the Duelist Cup and definitely exceeded my expectations in that regard. Gotta put it up in tier 2. You know, I saw somebody recently say online that like Lab is one of those decks that has so much variety because of the way that it's it works with normal traps that it can adjust itself to just about any meta. And I think that's why we've consistently seen it in like mid-tier 2, like since pretty much it came out, right? And while it's probably going to continue to stay there moving forward, I think. You know, Gimmick Puppet, I've been putting it in tier 3. In all honesty, I really don't think I can put it higher than Rogue. It's like I've said many times, the reason that Gimmick Puppet doesn't really need a hit in Master Duel as badly as in Paper Play is that the format, there is so much more play and as a result, refinement of the Master Duel meta than other Paper metas that like, yeah, Gimmick Puppet can come into a Paper tournament and sweep it because there's so much less exploration of a meta when you can only explore it by playing in major tournaments, right? Or that's only the place where it's going to get majorly explored, right? As opposed to Master Duel, where people are continuously, constantly playing, constantly getting data that's refining the meta. Long story short, if Gimmick Puppet starts to see a lot of play in Master Duel, people en masse will tech against it, and then it will just stop seeing play. And that's something that will come about a lot more quickly than Paper Play because of the prep time that is allotted. I think I've spoken that point sufficiently by now. But Heroes, I'm going to continue to put in Rogue. I don't really think I need to super explain that one. Chimera. Chimera is a very interesting deck. I'm going to put it in tier 3, just a little bit below Yubel. But I could see an argument for putting it up in tier 2, honestly, above Yubel. The thing about Chimera, I just don't have enough experience either with or against it. It's not one of the decks that I've built, and it's very rare that I actually run into it in ladders. So I think without super knowing what it's all about, I couldn't place it any higher. But I wouldn't be surprised if it was like actually tier 2 power level. Flu, I'm gonna put in a Rogue, just here next to Hero. It's like it's Flu. Just give him back the. Impen went back to 3, right? I'm pretty sure it did. Give him back their other 2 maps at this point. Like, who cares, honestly? White Forest. Where do I think White Forest goes? Do I actually... I mean, yeah, it's probably tier 1. Do I put it just below Snake Eye? I think I will. I think I've slept on this deck quite a bit in terms of just how strong I thought it was. I think it was less about that... I think it's less that I thought White Forest is weak, and I kind of just thought everything... A lot of other things, rather... We're just going to end up being better. But yeah, I mean, White Forest and its variants have been, well, I mean, it's really mostly Fiendsmith as Amina, but I just think it's been exceedingly performing well in this meta for sure. Branded, I'm going to put towards, I was going to put it at the bottom of tier 2. Do I really think Branded is better than Yubel? I think they're pretty comparable. I think it's better than Tearlaments at least. Yeah, I'm fine with that. Only barely though. Like you know what? I keep hesitating enough on it. I am gonna put Branded in tier 3. No, not there. I'm gonna put it here. Yeah, I'll put it in tier 3. I just think that it's, you know what? I kind of even want to slide it down a little bit the more I think about it. I think that it's enough weaker than like some of this other stuff that it just has a harder time keeping up. Like, Branded is just kind of slipping off in terms of power level. It's doing the same thing it's always been doing, as the rest of the meta is like constantly growing and evolving. And what Branded can do is very strong, especially in capable hands, and is hugely varied, which is a lot of where that strength comes from. But at the end of the day, you know, this fusion toolbox can only keep up for so long before it's going to get naturally power crept. And we're just seeing that happen, I think, more and more as time goes on. So, okay. There's what I consider to be 25 of the most popular and powerful decks in Master Duel, and here's where I would place them based on my own perception of their power level. But what do you think? As always, I hugely welcome discourse. I think it's very, very valuable, as long as we're leaving rudeness out, which I think is generally, you know, something that everybody's in line with. But anyway, yeah, thank you for checking out this video. Super appreciate you. And again, let me know what you think in the comments below. That is going to do it for this one, though, so why don't we move on to our outro. Hey everybody, Hexlex here. Thank you so very much for watching all the way to the very end of the video, which, by the way, is one of the best ways to support the channel. Speaking of supporting the channel, take a look at the names on screen. These are folks who have been so generous as to either join as a YouTube member or subscribe over on patreon.com/Hexlex to support. There's also perks for doing so. If you would like to see YouTube videos early, as well as some exclusive videos that get uploaded to YouTube, but for one reason or another I decide not to publish, definitely go ahead and hit that join button to see content early, as well as some exclusive content. If you're looking for more exclusive content, over on patreon.com, I upload exclusive videos that are not posted on YouTube just about every single day. Whether you choose to subscribe over on Patreon, join as a YouTube member, or simply continue to watch, your support is greatly appreciated. Thank you so very much. But for now, this is Hexlex. I am signing out, and I hope that you have a fantastic day.